Welcome back to the Halfway to Game Day podcast. I'm your host, Will Schatz. Week 6 was one that a lot of people thought might be a sleeper, might be one that you could miss if you've got, family pictures to go take, or you need to have a date day, date night. You could miss week 6. There weren't many things happening. And so you probably went out and made plans and took the wife on a nice date or took the kids to the park, and you look down at your phone and you're like, that's an odd score in the Vanderbilt-Alabama game. What? Surely Missouri's going to jump back in this game. And then if it was a date night, you might have been like, why is it the third quarter and Tennessee scored so few points? What's going on there? I'm changing the format of the show a little bit this week. We're still early enough in this show's life where I feel comfortable adjusting stuff kind of on the fly. So today we're not going to really recap any of the games last week. We're going to turn this more into a preview show and less of a recap show. Now, with that being said, in this section at the beginning, I'm going to touch on stuff that did happen because it's relevant to stuff that we're going to be talking about. But primarily, we're going to be talking about last week's games in the context of this week's games. So I'm pivoting to more of a little bit of a gambling focus as a way to drive conversations about the games of the upcoming week, if that makes sense. And you'll see as we go through this show kind of how I'm planning on doing stuff. I did want to touch on the 3 games I mentioned in the intro, though. Alabama loses to Vanderbilt on the road. The one thing I can say is that normally when Alabama would get upset in the Nick Saban era, it was always like, well, they just maybe got out-schemed and maybe made too many mistakes and they lost. It was a very high-variance game. It could have gone either way and they lost. I don't think this loss could have gone either way. I think if you played this game in the same context 10 times, I think Vanderbilt would win 9 of them. It was very much Vanderbilt beating Alabama at the line of scrimmage, which is something I don't think anybody thought they would say. And Alabama's defense completely unable to get a stop on the Vanderbilt offense, which, don't get me wrong, is improved, but is not up to the standard of Alabama. So there is a concern level for Alabama, but the fact that I kind of thought this 2 weeks ago now with the Georgia game, where I was like, how much of this is Georgia playing poorly and how much of this is Alabama playing excellent? And I think Alabama was playing to their peak in that Georgia game. I think Georgia clearly was playing down, especially in the first half, was playing down. I don't think Georgia is as good as they have been, but I do think Georgia's better than what they were in that first half when they got down to Alabama. They just weren't able to come back, but they did come back and take a lead. And that game is remembered a lot differently if Alabama blows that lead, right? So then you come into this week with Alabama against Vanderbilt, and you think, well, Alabama just beat Georgia. They're the number 1 team in the country now. And Vanderbilt just looked like a more uniform team. That's what I could say. And Alabama got outcoached, which is not something we would say in the Nick Saban era. So there's definitely a concern level I have for Alabama, and we will see that in the Halfway to Game Day poll updated rankings this week. Missouri, okay, maybe I should save that one for last because I've got some things to say. We'll do Tennessee-Arkansas next. Tennessee-Arkansas is a little bit less of definitely a lot less of a surprise. Tennessee, there was always this idea that this could happen. And we knew how good their offense was in the first 3 weeks against the teams they played. And then they played a really good defense in Oklahoma. And they don't get held to as few points, but it wasn't as surprising. Because they score a little bit. They score when it matters. And it seemed like they took their foot off the gas. This game against Arkansas, they were nearly incapable of scoring, and Nico looked poor. It was definitely his worst game yet, and he looked bad. Arkansas, this was a lot more high variance of a game where if you have Nico play a little bit better, Arkansas or Tennessee wins a lot more. But I don't know, it was just bizarre. It's not as surprising as the Alabama one because I think everybody was kind of expecting Nico to have a bad performance. I don't know, especially through the first 3 games, I don't know that I thought it would be possible that the poor performance would lose them the game. I thought their offense was good enough, even without Nico playing at peak performance to win a football game. It was not. They need Nico to play. He was playing probably at 15 to 20%. They need him to play at probably 75 to 80 to even have a chance in a lot of games. The last game I'm going to talk about. Goodness, my throat is so dry. Hold on. Excuse me. Last game we're going to talk about before we jump into Week 7's wild slate. Missouri gets absolutely dominated by Texas A&M. Listen, I ate crow earlier in the year for what I said about South Carolina, which honestly might be a little bit more true than I should have eaten crow for, right? Missouri's... I've been on this Missouri train. I've been screaming from the mountaintops that they're fraudulent the whole year. You can go back and listen to any episode of this podcast. I mentioned it at least once that they were fraudulent, and I don't prey on the downfall of teams very much, but the Missouri fans were acting like they were legitimate national title contenders, and in my head, I was like, these people are so delusional. I don't know what they see on the field on Saturdays, but that is not a national title contender. They're not an elite team. They're an above-average team. They're not even a very good team. They're an above-average team. Brady Cook has actually regressed from last year, and they're just not very good. They're not like SEC elite caliber on the lines of scrimmage. I'm sorry, they're a upper middle of the pack team. I don't think they have a legit chance to get to the SEC championship game. I never thought that. And so I started thinking, and I was like, okay, they were what, 6th in the polls this last week? I don't remember. 8th, 9th, I don't remember what they were. But the national media was very much on Missouri is, Missouri's good. Missouri's a good team. They're a top 10 team. But from what I remember, nobody had them in the SEC championship game. So I thought to myself, why is that? Why is everybody saying... Because if you're a top 10 team, and everybody agrees that you're a top 10 team, or even a top 15 team, normally people will have you, even as a long shot to make the SEC title game. Nobody even had them as a long shot. And so I thought, well, why is that? It's because subconsciously, whether they would want to admit it or not, everybody knew Missouri wasn't as good. Missouri, for the national media, was a pawn that is going to be used later on in the year. And this is not me saying that Texas A&M is not deserving, but let's say Texas A&M goes 11-1, they beat Texas at the end of the year, and they go 12-1, I guess, and win the SEC championship. That's not a good example. Let's say they go 9-3. Let's say they lose 2 more games. They're competitive with Texas at the end of the year, and they don't make the SEC title. And let's meet somewhere in the middle. Let's say 10-2 with a loss to Texas. That would mean that they would be in the ACC title game, or in the SEC title game. And let's say they lose. So let's say they go 11-3. Okay? I still don't know. That's a very good example. But my point being, Missouri's going to be used as a pawn because they're not going to make the playoff. So, but they are going to be used as a token to say, well, Ole Miss, who didn't make the SEC title game and lost 3 games, or Texas A&M, who didn't make the SEC title and lost 3 games, they beat Missouri when Missouri was a top 10 ranked team, so that has to stand for something. And in Texas A&M's case, they beat Missouri by a lot, and Missouri was a top 10 team at the time. Missouri's never been a top 10 team. This was a ploy by the national media to get another SEC team in the top 10 to pad that conference's resumes. I mean, that's has to be what it is, because there's no way, if me, somebody who knows a lot about college football but does not know it from like a national media perspective, like those guys would run circles around me, can see from far away, hey, Missouri's not very good. And all of these national media guys are like, oh yeah, Missouri's good. They're not an SEC, championship game contender, but yeah, we'll slot them in the top 10. There has to be a reason for that. And I think it was to pad the resume. But anyway, I've gone far too long on that. Missouri, not very good. Listen, I don't dislike Missouri. I normally like Missouri. The problem is they got a little bit of a taste of success last year because they had a good running back. And now they don't know how to act. They just completely their fan base has just completely lost the plot on how to act. And they think that they think that they're relevant, and they're not. So, and let's just back off a little bit, Missouri fans. All right. Let's jump right in. Like I said, I'm going to change the format a little bit. So we're going to talk about the games in the context of betting as a way to drive the conversation. And we're going to go by ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and then other conferences. So we'll kind of hit big games for the upcoming week 2, or for the upcoming week as well, upcoming week 7 as well, at the same time. And we'll be able to talk about a lot more games than we were. And when I envisioned this podcast, I envisioned it as a preview show, and it was more of a recap show with a slight emphasis on preview at the very end. And I want this to be more of a preview show, if that makes sense. So we'll see the format. If you're watching visually, you'll be able to see the games on the screen. I will make sure to say the games and say the lines. How I'm going to do it, and you'll see, I'll pick a couple games from each conference, the important ones, and I will talk about it a little bit. And then I'm going to give a bet that if I had to bet on the game, what bet I would make. That's not to say that all of these bets are bets I'm going to make, but if I, gun to my head, I had to make a bet on the game, I'll tell you what bet I made, and you'll be able to see that visually before I say it, but you audio listeners will have a little bit of suspense. So we're going to start with the ACC, and the only game that I picked for this week was Cal going on the road to visit number 22 Pittsburgh. Now, this is a game that I think the woke agenda continues for Cal, right? They're trying to wokeify the ACC, and they visit the East Coast this time. They visit they visit Pittsburgh, in a swing state of Pennsylvania, and they're trying to wokeify it before the upcoming election, and they're on that train. But no, Cal Twitter is excellent. They're the best. But Pittsburgh, this is really a clash of styles to me. California likes to run the ball, and their defense has played okay. They haven't played great, but they've played okay. And Pittsburgh likes to throw it, obviously. They've kind of gone away from... they're still a Pat Narduzzi team, clearly, but they like to throw it way more than they have. They like to throw it basically as much as they threw it when they had Kenny Pickett. Now, with that being said, the bet that if I had to make a bet on this game, I would go under 59.5. How I think this is going to go, I think, I think Pittsburgh's defense is good enough to keep Cal at bay and maybe force them into kicking field goals. But I don't think they're good enough necessarily to force 3 and outs on every drive. So if that makes sense. So it'll be a lot of time of possession for Cal. And I think Cal is good enough to hold Pittsburgh's offense at bay enough. I'm thinking maybe this is like a 38 to 10 or 17 kind of deal. Either one of those results gets me under the 59.5. And then if Pittsburgh drops any points, I don't think Cal will score more than probably 20. So that puts me at 39 for Pittsburgh, and I'm still safe. Yeah. Puts me at 39 for Pittsburgh, and I'm still safe. I am definitely comfortable with an under 59.5 bet here. Next conference is the Big 12. There are 2 games on the docket this week that I'm really interested in. We have number 16 Utah going on the road to Arizona State, and then we have number 18 Kansas State going on the road to play Colorado. These are two games that let's start with Utah and Arizona State. Utah, who knows if Cam Rising's playing? He may have graduated and he may be pursuing a full-time career. Who knows? I mean, he is MIA. We may never see him play college football again. Quite frankly, I think it's ridiculous. I touched on this last show. I think that there's got to be something. There's got to be a rule, a standardization of injuries, whatever it may be, where this can't happen anymore, because this is ridiculous. The fans deserve to know. Bettors deserve to know. Broadcasters deserve to know. Everybody deserves to know. You're at a point now where you're not getting a competitive advantage because teams are just assuming Cam Rising's not going to play. And if he does play, this is a guy that's played 6 quarters of football in 2 years, right? Like, he's a good quarterback. Is he elite? No. Can he change a game? Sure. But, he needs to play, and you're getting to a point in your season where you're going to start throwing games, I think, if you don't play him. Now, with that being said, I'm going to assume he doesn't play. They haven't proven to me that I should trust them on he's playing good in practice. He's might be a go. I don't trust them. I'm going to say he doesn't play. I'm going to say Utah leans on their run game, and I'm going to say Arizona State, certainly with Scattaboo, their big running back. I'm gonna, obviously they're gonna lean on their run game, and I think they both do just enough defensively to keep this under 45. So if I had to make a bet on Utah versus Arizona State, I would go with the under 45. Kansas State versus Colorado. This is a game I could see going a lot of different ways. The fact that it's in Boulder makes me concerned a little bit for Kansas State. Now, I do think Kansas State will win. I have Colorado +4. I liked the 4 number because it allows me for Kansas State to still have a field goal. So, they could win by a field goal and this bet still hits and we cover. Kansas State, Avery Johnson's been a lot worse on the road. So I could honestly see Colorado winning this game outright, and I thought about maybe picking that, and I might still. Maybe that'll be one of my Twitter picks. I'm not sure. But Colorado can score points. We know Kansas State's defense is good. This to me, we know Colorado's defense isn't great. It's improved, but it's not great. And we know Kansas State's offense might struggle on the road. This to me just has the makings of a close Big 12 game. I think it's under the lights. I think it's at night. This one is setting up, to me in my head, the way it plays out, to be tight. And I think that in that case, if it's a field goal or if it's a 1, 2, 3 point game or even a 4-point game, we push. I think like if it's 28-24 Kansas State and we push, I'm not mad about that. I think it has all the makings of setting up to be a close one. So the next conference will be the Big Ten. I also have 2 games for this conference on the docket. Number 4 Penn State traveling all the way across the country to Southern Cal. So Cal will pass the Penn State Nittany Lion plane on the way. They will pass each other in the air. Wouldn't it have been easier if there was just one conference on the West Coast and one conference on the East Coast where Penn State and Pittsburgh could have played and USC and Cal could have played? Wouldn't that have been easier and it was geographical? Seems like a good idea. They should think about that. Anyway, Penn State versus USC. I have the over 50.5. I could see USC is 3-2 and they're unranked. If you just looked at this game, you'd be like, "Well, what in the world? Why would you ever even give USC a chance against the number 4 team in the country?" USC could win this game outright. I truly believe that. Now, with that being said, USC has struggled against good defenses. Penn State obviously has a very good defense. If this doesn't hit, it's because it's not as wild as I'm thinking. But I think Penn State's offense really tries to get on track this week. And I think USC just has a good enough offense to where if we're talking that this is a game that's, 28-24, and that's over 50.5, that hits. I think that that's what this game could be. If this doesn't hit, it's because Penn State's defense clamps up USC and Penn State only scores 28 and USC scores 13, right? But I would live with that. I think the variance of it, I think it's more likely to go over 50.5 than under. The other Big Ten game is obviously the biggest game of the weekend. Number 2, Ohio State versus number 3, Oregon. Ohio State being on the road in Eugene, it's really the first game that they've played where they've had any kind of test. I'm going to go under 53. And the reason I say this, Oregon is a big time of possession team. Dylan Gabriel is a high passing percentage, keep the clock running, run the ball, just hold the ball kind of team, right? Ohio State hasn't really played anybody, so I think their offense in the first half could really, really struggle against this talented Oregon defense, keeping them at bay for a while. And, I definitely think we see some stuff out of both of these teams that we haven't seen yet. This is really the game on both of their schedules where they're going to try to, maybe run some trick plays and get some off-script stuff and to keep the defense off balance. I don't see this one going over 53. I think that both the defenses will bow up. We know for Ohio State, defense travels, and I think Oregon is okay with that. I think Oregon's okay with this being a close game late. I think both of these teams are okay with this being a close game late, which makes me think that they may, do the typical Big Ten thing and lay low for 3 quarters and then have an awesome fourth quarter. So that is the Big Ten, and we'll be talking about the SEC next before we go on to the other conferences. We have 3 games in the SEC. South Carolina versus number 7 Alabama. I picked this game because this is this is a get-right game for Alabama. Alabama coming off that loss that we talked about earlier against Vanderbilt, getting upset. They only dropped 6 spots to number 7. South Carolina's obviously got a very talented defense. They have some injuries, though. And with this game being in Tuscaloosa, I think Alabama's going to want to make a point. So my bet is Alabama team total over 35.5. I think Alabama could score 38. I think they could score 41. And if we think to the Vanderbilt game, it was not their offense that was the problem. It was the defense. The defense could not get a stop against that Vanderbilt offense. So I think if I'm betting on the Alabama offense to go over 35.5, which they have done multiple times this year, I feel very comfortable doing that. The next game is the Red River Shootout, number 1 Texas versus number 18 Oklahoma. This game is more of a principle play. This is a game that's always wild. You look at this and you're like, well, Texas is... I believe Texas is clearly the most elite team in the country. Now, with that being said, if we just looked at this game in a vacuum, if you ignored the rivalry and ignored the whole history, you'd say, well, Texas wins pretty clearly. I don't think Oklahoma is nearly as good as Texas, which I don't. But this game always has a way of making insane, just having insane, highly scoring games. You can go back and look at the series history, and just see the totals that have hit. So you're giving me 50.5 in a game where I think it could be in the 70s. Yeah. I'm going to take that. So give me Texas versus Oklahoma over 50.5. The last SEC game will be number 9 Ole Miss versus number 13 LSU. This is a really important game, and I'm going to be honest, I don't really like any of the totals that were out there. This is going to be a high-scoring one, I think. It's going to be a wild one in Death Valley. I think there's a good chance LSU wins. And if LSU wins, they get right, they get on track and right back in the thick of things. So the one thing I went with is I think it's going to be a close game, and I think it's going to be a high-scoring game where they go score for score. Drive down the field, score. Both teams just keeping up with each other. Maybe a pick 6 here, maybe a pick 6 there, whatever. The one bet that caught my eye, will there be overtime? I'm going to do the yes for plus 930. I don't know. That doesn't seem like too crazy of a bet to me. It just seems like a game with this magnitude where Ole Miss is trying to bounce back from 2 weeks ago still against a really good team on the road. This could just be a wild game where normally when there's this super high scoring when there's these super high scoring wild games in the SEC, they normally tend to go to overtime. So I like will there be overtime plus 930. And lastly, we will take a look at the other conferences. Starting in the Sun Belt, I've got Coastal Carolina versus James Madison. Total touchdowns over 7.5. Yeah, I was reaching for these last two, I'll be honest. But they're games that I was interested in, and I thought this game, Coastal and JMU would be a high scoring one. I didn't really like any of the totals. I could have gone over, but I was like, I've kind of gone over and under a lot. Let me just pick something different. So I picked something that caught my eye. Over 7.5 is plus money. The over 6.5 was really juiced, so I was like, I'll go over 7.5. 7.5 puts you at 7 is 49, correct? Yes, 7 is 49. So if you go 8, you're at 56, right? That doesn't seem crazy to me. 8 touchdowns between these, 4 touchdowns each. If they go 28 and 28, right? That's 8 touchdowns. That doesn't seem that crazy to me. And it's plus money? Sure. Give me total touchdowns over 7.5 for Coastal and JMU. In the American, UAB versus Army. UAB, I think, is completely quit. Trent Dilfer said, we did not discuss this because it's UAB, but said some very interesting things and had a very interesting press conference 2 weeks ago. And I think his team has quit on him. I think he's going to get fired here either shortly or immediately after the season. Going to be fired. So with that being said, Army's very, very good. Both Army and Navy are very good. I'm very happy about that. I don't know if there's any college football fan that's like, oh no, the military academies are back. I think it's awesome. I think it's excellent. It's 1940s all over again. With that being said, I don't think UAB will score very much. And Army obviously can score. I think they're 20.5-point favorites in this game. They can obviously score. But I don't think they can score 55. I think UAB might score 3 or 10. Army will score 35. That puts us under the 55. I'm going to go UAB versus Army under 55. And finally, our last game that we're going to talk about, number 17 Boise State versus Hawaii. This one's more of a keeping the travel in mind. Boise State obviously loves to run the ball. Ashton Jeanty's probably my Heisman pick if I had to pick right now. He's going to run a lot in Hawaii. I think they're going to want to. I think Boise's going to want to just kind of play some clock and just get home. This is a late game, local time for Boise. I'm going to go under 61.5. I think Boise's defense is good enough to stop Hawaii and keep their end of the bargain. I think Boise State will just maybe play a little bit slower than they have been. I'm going to go under 61.5. And so that's it for the kind of preview a little bit. Next, we're going to look at the updated halfway to game day rankings. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I will tell you the rankings as we reveal them. If you are watching visually, you can see them on the screen right now. There was obviously major shakeups because of all of the upsets. So, number 1 is still Texas. I still think they're the best team in college football. I haven't seen anything from them, healthy or injured, that makes me think, I'm not so sure. Number 2 is Georgia. They beat Auburn this last week. They're up 1 spot. They slide back into the number 2 spot after losing to Alabama 2 weeks ago. They looked good again, Georgia is Georgia. They are certainly in that upper echelon of teams that are just elite right now. And I don't think they're as good as Texas, but they are certainly up there, and that's certainly going to be an excellent game when they play it. Number 3 is Ohio State. They beat Iowa. They are up 1 spot. Ohio State's one of those teams that we've been asking. We've been saying, I wish they'd just play somebody. They beat the brakes off of everybody they've played, and that's great. I wish they would just play somebody legitimate. here we go. This week is the week they do it. When they go to play the team that we have in our 4th spot, that's Oregon. They beat Michigan State last week. They jumped all the way into the rankings. They were not even looking in. I realized after that Michigan State game and then kind of looking at their body of work, this is a team that needs to be in the top 5. So I think number 2 and number 3 in the AP poll are playing. Number 3 and number 4 are playing in the HTGD poll. And so, yeah, that'll be a heck of a game. And finally, Ohio State's going to play somebody. Oregon, I think, is more battle-tested. That's going to be a heck of a game, man. Number 5 is Penn State. They were looking in last week. They beat UCLA, and like I said, they were in. Penn State's starting to impress me a lot more. Their offense is still a little bit too inconsistent for me to consider them elite, like in the same echelon as the top 3. But they are impressive, and I just like Penn State. I always like kind of the upper level underdog where they just can't seem to get over the hump. I'm rooting for Penn State the rest of this year. I'm excited. I'm excited to see how their team continues to evolve. The only team looking in this week is Miami. You know, you could make an argument that Miami deserves to be in the top 5. You know, they're 5-0 or 6. They're 6-0, and they deserve to be there. They've played around far too much these last 2 weeks for me to slot them into number 5. Last week I said it, or slot them into the top 5. Last week I said it where, you know, I held them out of motivation, out of spite, kind of, where I wanted them to prove to me that they deserve to be in the top 5. They have not done that yet. They are still an elite team, basically number 6. But they need to quit playing around so much. Cam Ward has to figure out the wild interceptions, get a little bit less variant, and just perform a little bit better to be slotted into the top 5. The 2 teams that fell out are obviously Alabama and Tennessee after being upset. I think we saw kind of what the floor of those teams are, and that's a scary floor. Hopefully they don't hit it again. Hopefully they're able to make their way back up into the poll. The top 5 games of next week. We've talked about most of these except for one, so we'll kind of breeze through the first 3, and then we'll talk about number 4 because that's the one we haven't talked about. At 2:30, number 1 Texas goes on the road to face number 18 Oklahoma. I hate that this game is not at 11. Hopefully they're able to get back to that 11 o'clock time slot. It fits so well for what Red River is. This is going to be a heck of a game. It's going to be high scoring. It's going to be wild. Make sure you tune in at 2:30 to watch this bad boy. Also at 2:30, Cal versus number 22 Pitt. We talked about this one. I like this game because Cal is still continuing their woke agenda, traveling across the country, and Pitt is they hope that Pitt will be their next victim. I was trying to think of like a he/him joke for Pitt, but I can't think of one, so we'll move on. At 6:30, number 9 Ole Miss versus number 13 LSU. Kind of the same vein as Red River, where I think just, you know, without the rivalry part, just there's going to be a lot of offense in this game, I think. I think it's going to be wild. I think it's going to be high scoring. But I guess I think it's going to go into overtime based off the bet I recommended earlier. Or not recommended, based off the bet I had to make earlier. At 7 o'clock, this is the game that we'll talk about a little bit. Number 11, Iowa State versus West Virginia. Iowa State quietly been a very good team, and they have been kind of the shocker of the year, I would say, positively. You know, obviously the shocker of the year was Florida State dropping as they have, but positively it's been Iowa State. Man, they're a good team. They're just well constructed. They know who they are. They don't do anything crazy. They play good defense. They've got an intelligent quarterback in Rocco Becht who can distribute the ball. They've got a really good running game and some great offensive linemen to power them up front. West Virginia's in for a heck of a game. I think Iowa State wins, even though it's on the road and at night. Morgantown's a tough place to play at night. We'll see how this one ends up going. I've got Iowa State, but that's going to be a heck of a game, and it's going to be one that might get lost because a lot of people are going to be watching the SEC and the Big Ten game that night. This will definitely make a third monitor. This is going to be a really, really fun Big 12 game. And the game of the week, of course, is everybody's game of the week. We're all in unison this week, I think. At 6:30, number 2 Ohio State versus number 3 Oregon. This game's going to be a banger. It has game of the year potential written all over it. I don't know if anything can beat that Alabama-Georgia game, but if it can, it's right here in Eugene. Number 2 versus number 3 at night, under the lights, 2 of the best teams in the country with national title aspirations. 2 new conference rivals. Ohio State didn't vote for Oregon to join the Big Ten. They didn't even want them in the Big Ten. There's a lot of storylines. It's going to be a really good one. So then we'll review our bets from last week. I bet Missouri versus Texas A&M, Texas A&M -2. That was a hit. My double play on Indiana, my 2-for-1 special, both of them hit. Indiana's my wagon. I love Indiana. They are a money-making machine. They print me money. Indiana versus Northwestern, Indiana -13.5 was a hit, and the over 42.5 in that same game was a hit. Beautiful. They did it. It went exactly as I thought it was going to. It was excellent. Michigan versus Washington, I had Michigan +2.5. Hey, man, Washington's better than I thought. That's all I can say. Congratulations to Washington. I thought Michigan would be able to lean on them a little bit more than they did. And unfortunately, they did not, and that bet did not hit. And my Twitter pick, or my X pick, was South Carolina +290. That did not hit. There was never a shot that was going to hit, unfortunately. So my Week 6 record was 3-2, and my overall record is 12-8. Pretty good thus far. Pretty good season that we've had. And hopefully we can see that continue into this next week with the weekly best bets. We heard about a couple of these earlier. We did not hear about some of these, so I'll discuss these a little bit more in depth. Texas versus Oklahoma over 50.5. This is, like I said, a principal play. It has to be over. It's the Red River Shootout. It's got to be over. It's going to be wild. We may see somebody decapitated. We may see, there may be a flea flicker. Quinn Ewers throws off his back foot. What's that on the 20-yard line? It's Sarkisian and Brent Venables. They're getting married. What's going on? Who knows? That's the kind of things that happens in Red River. People fall in love. It's going to be a wild game. That's my point. It's going to be high scoring. Mississippi State +34 against Georgia. This is purely a play based off how I saw Mississippi State play against Texas. Mississippi State has no interest in getting blown out. SSIPP. Okay, I was making sure I spelled Mississippi right there. I did, but it looks odd. Mississippi State has no interest in getting blown out, so they just hold the ball and snap it with 3 seconds left on the play clock every single time they have it. I think Georgia's obviously going to win, but I think maybe it's a 30-point or a 28-point or a 24-point cover. I don't think they're going to hit the 34. But that number I don't like. If it was 35, I'd like it more. 35.5 would be, oof. 34 is tough. UAB versus Army under 55. This would honestly be probably my only lock it up, right? Army is not going to score 55 points on their own. They're not going to score 45 points on their own. They could score 35 on their own, and in that case, if UAB scores 10 or 17, we're good. Under 55, UAB Army. Cincinnati versus UCF. This is kind of just a play where I'm saying I think UCF is just much better than Cincinnati. I know UCF has struggled the last couple weeks. I think they get back on track. There's a hurricane coming through, so maybe that'll rally them and help their community. If not, last time I saw UCF play in a hurricane was against Oklahoma State, and they beat the brakes off of Oklahoma State in their space game. So I'm going to say UCF covers the 3 against Cincinnati. And then Minnesota versus UCLA under 40.5. This is a game to me where I've watched both these teams play. I'm not convinced they have a competent offense, and I'm not really convinced that UCLA has a competent defense either. Now, with that being said, I still think Minnesota's offense is really, really bad. Give me the under 40.5. That one. I think that one's going to be a really low scoring game. That's going to be one that if you wanted to pick a game, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, what game do you not want to watch this week? Minnesota versus UCLA. That game's going to suck. So good luck if you're a fan of either one of those teams, because God, bro, I'd have to be so drunk before I could even watch that. I don't even know that would help. That's a bad game. But yeah, with that being said, we're gonna wrap it up for this week. Obviously these episodes are gonna be a little bit shorter because we don't go into that full recap. Still trying to find a little bit of a happy medium on how I like to do it. So the recap may come back in one way or another, and just maybe shorter. I was hitting a lot of games in the recap, and I don't know. I want this to be more of a preview show that you can listen to in the middle part of the week. Rather than what happened, like a review show. I like the idea of the betting driving the conversation on the games, and I think that will continue to improve. We're still figuring things out here. We're still figuring out a format, but hopefully we can get one set that everybody likes, that I like to do, and that doesn't keep me here for hours upon hours upon hours. So, with that being said, everybody enjoy this excellent slate of games in Week 7. It has the potential to be, game quality-wise, one of the best weeks of college football we've ever seen. So everybody make sure, no family plans, no dates, shut the blinds, turn the lights off, and just watch some college football on Saturday. Turn your brain off, just enjoy it. We don't get many Saturdays like this. We don't get many Saturdays of college football, period. We definitely don't get many Saturdays of college football with a slate like this. These games are going to be awesome. I'm excited for Red River. I'm excited for that Ohio State game. I'm excited for a lot of games. There's going to be multiple laptops, multiple TVs set up in my house, and we're gonna enjoy some college football. So if you're going to any of the games, as always, drive safe, drive responsibly, not only for yourself, but watch for people on the road, because there's some crazy people at these games, especially if you are in Georgia. You don't know who may be driving fast next to you. Maybe a player. Who knows? With that being said, everybody have a great week and have a great weekend, and we will catch you back here again next Wednesday for another episode of the Halfway to Game Day podcast. As always, this has been your host, Will Schatz, signing off.